Hi everyone, I'm Yasha and welcome to the 8th episode of Election Scoop. Today we'll be starting off a series on the party systems. It's less confusing than it sounds, don't worry. The party systems are just the periods of US history divided into which party was dominant at the time. They're a great way to learn about America's history through a political lens. There are 6 party systems and I won't give them all away today, but we'll be discussing the first one, creatively called the first party system. But first, let's get a few concepts straight. This is a history episode, not a current politics episode, and therefore we need to remember that ideology was different. The terms liberal and conservative as we know them today wouldn't really apply back then, and really only began to form in the modern American political sense around the early 1900s. We also have to remember that the United States contained no more than a couple dozen states hogging the East, and therefore concepts like West and North mean different things culturally and geographically as we take them here in 2017. The first party system, roughly, ran from the founding of political parties in the United States to about 1824, and it was the only period in American history not to feature today's 2 major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. It was characterized by competition, well, not that it was that competitive, between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. The Federalists were the party of the northern states, run by the banking elite and the wealthy. The Federalists supported a strong central government and an alliance with Britain. Although the first president, George Washington, aligned with the Federalists, there was really only one truly Federalist president, John Adams, and one can see why he was the only one. Adams was a brilliant statesman who pushed for American independence and made famously tough, principled decisions. But in office, he made a huge mistake and passed the Alien and Sedition Acts, which, among other things, made it a crime to criticize the federal government. Newspaper printers and congressmen were thrown in prison like nothing, and it seemed like the American ideals of freedom and democracy were fleeting. In the next election, the election of 1800, voters flocked in droves to the other main party, the Democratic Republicans. The Democratic Republicans are the direct predecessors of the modern-day Democrats, but that's an insanely complicated and really long story I won't even attempt to touch in this episode. Suffice to say that the Democratic Republican Party, led initially by Thomas Jefferson, carried the day for the rest of the first party system. After 1800, the first election that they won, the Democratic Republicans never left power. Some of the most famous founding fathers were Democratic Republican presidents, like Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, and even John Quincy Adams, son of the aforementioned Federalist president. The Democratic Republicans appealed to the common man in order to win their elections. They opposed the big banking and big government supported by the Federalists, but their base, which for most of the system was rural and southern, were fervent supporters of slavery. Now, the Federalists didn't really disappear because their ideas were unpopular, but because all the policies were already enforced. A central bank, amicable relations with Britain, a standing army, and a strong federal government were already in American society. There was no need to keep rehashing their points. And by the end of the first party system, the Democratic Republicans were going up and up and up and up and up. Federalists didn't even nominate a presidential candidate in the election of 1820, although one grumpy elector refused to vote for the unopposed nominee. They made up 90% of the US Congress, both the House and the Senate. And it seemed like the Democratic Republicans would rule harmoniously forever, and that the era of good feelings, as it was called, would continue to bestow a peachy future on all America and its citizens, and they lived happily ever after in the end. But, in 1824, roughly the last year of the system's existence, a country general by the name of Andrew Jackson rode out of Tennessee and changed the course of our country's history forever. And we'll be discussing that in another episode of the party systems. One cool fact is that the longest living of the bunch, Federalist John Adams and Democratic Republican Thomas Jefferson, both signed the Declaration of Independence. On July 4th, 1826, exactly the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration, Adams died. His last words were, Jefferson still survives, meaning that his old rival, his old kind of frenemy, had defeated him in the final battle of old age. Unbeknownst to Adams, Jefferson actually had died that very same day, 4 hours earlier, but there was no way back then that Adams would have known. How ironic. So thanks for watching, and remember, don't forget to vote.